When you hear someone say a legend can't play for anything, you expect drama, especially when the guy they're talking about is Tom Seaver, one of the greatest pitchers to ever take the mound. The thumbnail says it all. He can't play for anything. And you're thinking this is going to be about rivals, about enemies and other dugouts, about players who couldn't stand him. But here's the twist that nobody sees coming. The baseball legends didn't hate Tom Seaver at all. Not Pete Rose, not Don Sutton, not Nolan Ryan, not Buddy Harrelson, not Dave Kingman. None of them. The real hatred came from somewhere else entirely. It came from the suits in the owner's box and the pens in the press room. And that hatred didn't just hurt Seaver, it destroyed an entire franchise. It turned one of baseball's proudest teams into a joke. And it created a stadium so empty and dead that fans gave it a name that still haunts the Mets to this day. So who actually hated Tom Seaver? Why did that hate consume them? And why did it turn a championship team into a graveyard? Let's find out. The story everyone thinks they know is simple. Tom Seaver was cocky. He demanded too much money. He thought he was better than everyone else. He looked down on his teammates. He started fights with rivals. The legends couldn't stand him. That's the narrative. That's what people believe. But when you look at what actually happened, when you dig into the real relationships Seaver had with the biggest names in baseball, that story falls apart fast. Start with Pete Rose, Charlie Hustle himself. The guy who played baseball like his life depended on it. The guy who ran to first base on a walk just to intimidate the pitcher. Rose and Seaver went head-to-head for years. Rose played for the Cincinnati Reds. Seaver pitched for the New York Mets. They were rivals in the truest sense. Rose was known for trash talking. He never stopped chirping at opponents. He got in their heads. He made them uncomfortable. If there was bad blood between them, if there was real hate, you'd expect it to be obvious. You'd expect it to show up in interviews, in their body language, in the way they talked about each other. But in 1979, they filmed a TV show together. It was called Greatest Sports Legends. And here's the kicker. Seaver was the host, Rose was the guest. They did a batting practice segment for the cameras. Rose joked around asking Seaver to throw him something easy. He said he didn't want a Tom Seaver fastball, just something he could hit. He was smiling, laughing. Seaver laughed right back and fired a response. He said maybe the only way Rose could get on base was by getting hit by a pitch. They were having fun, trading barbs, playing up their rivalry for the audience. This wasn't two guys who hated each other. This was two professionals who respected each other enough to play their roles, to give the fans what they wanted. And they did it again on the Mike Douglas Show in 1977. Same exact thing. Joking, laughing, playing the villain and the hero depending on who was talking. The feud was a show, it was theater, it was good for business, it was good for baseball, it sold tickets, it got people watching. But it wasn't real. It was never real. When Seaver got traded to the Reds in 1977, he and Rose became teammates. They wore the same uniform. They shared the same clubhouse. And Rose didn't just tolerate Seaver. He didn't just put up with him because they were on the same team. Rose became one of his greatest friends and advocates. He supported Seaver. He praised him. He talked about how great it was to have Seaver on his side instead of against him. The so-called hate vanished the second they wore the same uniform. Because it was never there in the first place. It was all smoke and mirrors. A story sold to fans who wanted to believe in larger-than-life rivalries. Then there's Don Sutton. Sutton pitched for the Los Angeles Dodgers. He was a craftsman on the mound, a future Hall of Famer just like Seaver. The two of them argued through the media about who was the better pitcher in the National League. Seaver said he was the best. Sutton said he was the best. It got heated. Reporters loved it. Fans picked sides. It looked like a real feud. The kind of rivalry that defines an era. Two aces battling for supremacy, fighting for respect, fighting for the title of best pitcher in baseball. But it wasn't Sutton who started it. It wasn't Sutton who wanted to fight. It was the Mets management. Specifically, it was M. Donald Grant. In 1976, Seaver was in the middle of a brutal contract fight with the team. He wanted more money. The market had changed. Salaries were going up. But the Mets chairman, M.F. Donald Grant, didn't want to pay Seaver what he was worth. So Grant needed leverage. He needed a way to make Seaver feel replaceable, to make him feel like he wasn't as special as he thought. So Grant threatened to trade Seaver to the Dodgers for Sutton. And he didn't just whisper it in a closed-door meeting. He made it a big story. He leaked it to the press. He wanted everyone to know. Suddenly, everyone was talking about a Seaver for Sutton swap. The media went crazy. Would the Mets really do it? Would they trade their franchise player? Reports started circulating that the deal was close, that it might happen any day. The whole thing became a circus. Grant used Sutton as a weapon. He used him as a bargaining chip in a war Sutton didn't ask to be part of. Grant wanted to send Seaver a message. You're replaceable. We can get another ace. You're not as important as you think you are. Sutton wasn't trying to take Seaver's job. He didn't ask to be dragged into this fight. He was just a name Grant threw around to make Seaver feel small, to put him in his place. The rivalry wasn't between the two pitchers. It was manufactured by management to win a contract negotiation. It was a tactic, a strategy, and it worked, at least temporarily, to put pressure on Seaver. What about Seaver's teammates? Didn't they resent him? Nolan Ryan was on the 1969 Miracle Mets with Seaver. They were friends, good friends. Ryan never had a problem with Seaver. The only reason Ryan's name ever came up in the feud was because a columnist used Ryan's salary to attack Seaver's wife. Ryan was a pawn. He didn't ask to be part of the fight. Buddy Harrelson played shortstop for the Mets. There were rumors that Harrelson didn't like Seaver because Seaver was too smart, too cerebral, but those rumors were garbage. Harrelson and Seaver were roommates. They were good friends. Seaver once said that having Harrelson at shortstop was like having another top pitcher on the field. That's not something you say about someone you don't respect. And then there's Dave Kingman. Kingman was a slugger. He was also fighting with the Mets front office over his contract. On the same night Seaver got traded, so did Kingman. Same team doing the trading. That tells you everything. This wasn't about Seaver being difficult. This was about management getting rid of anyone who stood up for themselves. What about Seaver's teammates? Didn't they resent him? Didn't they get tired of him being the star? Of him getting all the attention? Of him being called the franchise while they were just role players? That's what you'd think. That's what makes sense. Jealousy happens. Egos clash. But once again, when you look at the actual relationships, the story falls apart. Nolan Ryan was on the 1969 Miracle Mets with Seaver. That team shocked the world by winning the World Series. Nobody expected them to win. They were 100-to-1 underdogs, the amazing Mets. But they pulled it off, and Seaver and Ryan were both key parts of that team. Ryan was younger. He was still figuring things out. His control wasn't there yet. He threw hard, but he walked too many batters. But his arm was electric. Raw power. Everyone knew he had special talent. Everyone knew he would figure it out eventually. Seaver and Ryan were friends, good friends. They respected each other. They pushed each other to be better. There was no jealousy, no resentment. They were building something together. They were part of history. Ryan's name only came up in the feud years later, and it had nothing to do with Ryan himself. Nothing to do with Ryan having a problem with Seaver. The only reason Ryan got dragged into the fight was because a columnist named Dick Young used Ryan's salary to attack Seaver's wife. We'll get to that in detail soon. It's one of the ugliest moments in the whole story. But the point is, Ryan was a pawn. He was collateral damage. He didn't ask to be part of the fight. He didn't have a problem with Seaver. He was just a name that got used as a weapon. And Seaver knew it. He never blamed Ryan, because Ryan didn't do anything wrong. Ryan was innocent. He was just another victim of the machine that wanted to destroy Seaver. Then there's Buddy Harrelson. Harrelson played shortstop for the Mets. He was steady, reliable, consistent. The kind of player every team needs but fans don't always appreciate. Defense first, smart baseball. Harrelson made the plays. He turned double plays. He had great range. He was the anchor of the infield. There were rumors that Harrelson didn't like Seaver because Seaver was too smart, too cerebral. The rumor was that Harrelson felt like Seaver looked down on guys who didn't go to college, who weren't as educated, who didn't have the same intellectual approach to the game. The rumor painted Seaver as arrogant, as someone who thought he was better than everyone else. But those rumors were complete garbage. They were invented by people looking for drama, looking for conflict where none existed, looking for a storyline that would sell papers and get clicks. Harrelson and Seaver were roommates on the road. Think about that. You don't room with someone you don't like. You don't choose to spend that much time with someone who makes you uncomfortable. You don't share hotel rooms and meals and downtime with someone you resent. They were good friends. They had each other's backs. They trusted each other. Seaver once said that having Harrelson at shortstop every day was like having another top pitcher on the field. That's high praise. That's not something you say about someone you don't respect. That's not something you say about someone who resents you. That's the kind of compliment you give to a friend, to someone you rely on, to someone you value. And then there's Dave Kingman. Kingman was a slugger for the Mets, a power hitter. The kind of guy who could change a game with one swing. He wasn't perfect. He struck out a lot. His batting average wasn't great. He was all or nothing, home run or strikeout. But when he connected, the ball went a long way. Fans loved him for that. They loved the drama, the excitement, the possibility that every at-bat could be a moonshot. And just like Seaver, Kingman was fighting with the Mets front office over his contract. He wanted to be paid what he was worth. He wanted fair value for what he brought to the team. Management didn't want to pay him. They thought he was asking for too much. They thought he should just be grateful to play in New York. Sound familiar? It's the same story, the same conflict, the same power struggle. On the same night Seaver got traded, so did Kingman. Same exact night. June 15th, 1977, the Midnight Massacre. Seaver went to Cincinnati, Kingman went to San Diego. 2 stars gone in one night. Both dealt away like they were nothing. Like they were disposable, and that tells you everything you need to know. This wasn't about Seaver being difficult. This wasn't about him being hated by his teammates. This wasn't even personal. This was about management. getting rid of anyone who stood up for themselves, anyone who challenged authority, anyone who dared to ask for what they deserved, anyone who refused to play the role of the grateful servant. Kingman's trade proves that Grant wasn't just targeting Seaver. He was purging the entire team of players who refused to bow down. He was sending a message to everyone: stay in line or get out. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more content about baseball's biggest controversies, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Tell me if you knew about the Midnight Massacre. Tell me if you've heard this story before, because a lot of people don't know the truth about what happened to Tom Seaver. They don't know how ugly it really was, and that needs to change. So if the legends didn't hate Seaver, who did? One man: M. Donald Grant. Grant was the chairman of the board for the New York Mets. He was a Wall Street guy, buttoned up, authoritarian, conservative, old school in every sense of the word. He wore expensive suits. He moved in elite circles. He belonged to country clubs. He ran the team like he ran his stock trades. Cold, calculated, everything by the numbers, everything about control. And he could not stand Tom Seaver. Why? Because Seaver was more famous than him. Seaver was beloved. Seaver was the face of the franchise. When people thought about the Mets, they thought about Seaver, not Grant, not the front office, not the owners. Seaver. Fans called him the franchise. That nickname drove Grant absolutely crazy. It ate at him. It consumed him. Because in Grant's mind, he was the franchise. He was the one making the decisions. He was the one in control. Not some pitcher, not some player who threw a ball for a living. One time, Grant pulled aside a sports writer named Jack Lang. Lang was a respected baseball journalist. He covered the Mets. He knew the team inside and out. Grant told him to stop calling Seaver the franchise. He didn't ask. He commanded. He said the real franchise was the owner, Mrs. Joan Payson, and himself. Not some player, not some employee. The franchise was management. The franchise was ownership. Seaver was just a worker, just a hired hand. He didn't deserve that title. He hadn't earned that respect. Think about that for a second. Think about how insecure you have to be to get angry about a nickname. To get angry that your best player is beloved by fans. Most executives would be thrilled. Most team leaders would celebrate having a star that popular. It's good for business. It's good for ticket sales. It's good for the brand. But Grant saw it as a threat, not to the team, to his own ego. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't stand that a player was bigger than him, that a player had more respect, more love, more power with the public than he did. But it went deeper than jealousy, much deeper. Grant hated what Seaver represented, and what Seaver represented was change, progress, a new way of thinking about the relationship between players and management. Seaver was smart, really smart. He went to the University of Southern California. He had a degree. He could articulate his thoughts. He spoke his mind to the press. He gave thoughtful interviews. He wasn't just a dumb jock who said whatever the team wanted him to say. He had opinions. He had ideas. He wasn't afraid to challenge authority. He wasn't afraid to ask questions. He wasn't afraid to push back when something didn't make sense. And worst of all, from Grant's perspective, Seaver was the Mets' union representative. Let that sink in. The union representative. Seaver wasn't just playing baseball. He was organizing. He was leading. He was fighting for the rights of all players, not just himself. He was part of a movement that threatened everything Grant believed in. Grant despised the players' union. He saw it as a threat to the natural order of baseball, an attack on the way things had always been. In Grant's world, owners were in charge. They made the rules. They set the salaries. They decided who played and who didn't. Players were employees, workers, servants even. Employees didn't get to negotiate. They didn't get to make demands. They certainly didn't get to organize and fight collectively for better conditions. That was radical. That was dangerous. That was wrong. In 1976, there was a lockout. The owners and the players were fighting over free agency. The owners wanted to maintain control. They wanted to keep salaries low. They wanted to prevent players from shopping their services to other teams. The players wanted freedom. They wanted the ability to negotiate. They wanted to be paid what they were worth. It was a war. And Seaver took a leadership role. He stood up for the players. He fought for their rights. He wasn't quiet. He wasn't passive. He was vocal. He was visible. He was a problem. Grant was furious. He was incensed. He saw Seaver as a traitor, a troublemaker, a communist even. Seaver later shared 2 quotes from Grant that perfectly captured the chairman's mindset. These quotes reveal everything you need to know about Grant's worldview, about his values, about why he hated Seaver so much. During the labor negotiations, Grant came up to Seaver in the clubhouse one day. He walked right up to him, got in his face, and he said, "What are you, some sort of communist?" That's how Grant saw collective bargaining, as communism, as socialism, as un-American. He wasn't interested in fairness. He wasn't interested in workers' rights. He was interested in control, in power. in maintaining the old order where owners ruled and players obeyed. The second quote came when Seaver bought a membership at a country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. Greenwich was an affluent town. Seaver was making good money. He had every right to join a nice club. He had earned it. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball. He was famous. He had money. Why shouldn't he enjoy the privileges that came with success? But to Grant, this was an outrage. Grant found out about the membership and confronted him. He looked Seaver in the eye and said, "Who do you think you are? Not congratulations. Not good for you. Not you've earned it. But who do you think you are?" As if Seaver had crossed some invisible line. As if he had stepped out of his lane. As if he had forgotten his place. Seaver was making good money. He had every legal and moral right to join that club. But to Grant, Seaver was crossing a line. A social line. A class line. He was trying to be Grant's equal. He was trying to enter Grant's world. The world of country clubs and stock portfolios and old money. And in Grant's mind, that was absolutely unacceptable. Players didn't belong in that world. They belonged on the field, in the clubhouse, in their place. A future commissioner of baseball, Bart Giamatti, later wrote about this. Giamatti was a scholar, an intellectual. He understood what was really happening. He said Grant believed in a strict social order, an old order, a hierarchy that couldn't be challenged. Players were hired hands. They were labor. They were workers. They weren't supposed to act like equals. They weren't supposed to act like golf partners. They weren't supposed to challenge the boss. They weren't supposed to join the same clubs, play on the same courses, move in the same circles. Grant couldn't understand why Seaver didn't know his place, why he didn't accept his station in life, why he thought he could be more than just a player. This wasn't just about baseball anymore. It was about class. It was about social order. It was about an old world fighting desperately to survive against a new world that was coming whether they liked it or not. Grant felt like Seaver was uppity. That word has a history. It's been used for generations to put people down, to remind them that they're not equal, that they're beneath someone else. Grant thought Seaver was too smart, too confident, too willing to fight back, too unwilling to accept his role as a servant. And Grant hated him for it. Grant felt personally insulted that Seaver dared to challenge him, dared to question him, dared to act like an equal instead of a subordinate. But Seaver wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting on two fronts. In 1976, Seaver signed a 3-year contract worth $675,000. At the time, it made him the highest-paid pitcher in baseball. But just a few months later, a new collective bargaining agreement changed everything. Salaries exploded. A dozen players signed deals worth over $1 million. Suddenly, Seaver's contract looked outdated. Seaver wanted to renegotiate. That was fair. The market had changed. He deserved to be paid what he was worth. But Grant refused. He saw it as greed. He saw it as betrayal. And Seaver wasn't just asking for more money for himself. He was also pushing the Mets to sign free agents. The team was struggling. They needed help. There were good players available. One of them was Gary Matthews, an outfielder who would have been a perfect fit. Seaver was disgusted that the Mets, a big market team that was still drawing big crowds, refused to spend money to win. Grant took this personally. In his mind, Seaver wasn't just asking for a raise, he was questioning Grant's authority. He was telling Grant how to run the team. And Grant couldn't tolerate that. So Grant had a problem. He hated Seaver. He wanted Seaver gone. But Seaver was the most popular player in New York. Trading him would cause a riot. Grant needed help. He needed someone to turn the fans against Seaver. He needed a hitman. And he found one in Dick Young. Dick Young was a columnist for the New York Daily News. He was powerful. He had a huge readership. And he was very conservative. As he got older, he became more and more reactionary. He hated the new era of free agency. He thought players were greedy. He thought they were spoiled. And he always took management's side. Young didn't just report the news, he attacked people. He was known for running vicious vendettas against players and other journalists. He used his column to smear people with lies and distortions. One writer called him a boorish thug with a column. Another said he wrote acerbic trash. Years later, Young would tell Mets fans to stand up and boo Dwight Gooden when he returned from drug rehab. That's the kind of guy he was. Cruel, mean-spirited, and perfectly willing to go after anyone if it served his agenda. Grant and Young were a perfect match. Young became a shill for the Mets organization. He attacked Seaver relentlessly in his columns. He called Seaver greedy. He said Seaver was jealous of other players. He painted Seaver as a spoiled diva who cared more about money than winning. Grant had hired him as the vice president of communications. That's a massive conflict of interest. Young wasn't an objective journalist. He was a father-in-law defending the organization that employed his family. Other journalists knew about this. They suspected Young was getting inside information from the Mets front office, information he used to attack Seaver. Young wasn't reporting the news. He was helping Grant wage war, and that war was about to reach its peak. By mid-June 1977, the situation was out of control. Seaver wanted out. The fans were confused, the media was split. But in a last-ditch effort, Seaver tried to make peace. He went over Grant's head. He contacted the team's owner, Lorinda DeRoulet, directly. They talked. They negotiated. And it worked. They agreed to a 3-year extension. Trade talks were halted. Seaver was going to stay a Met for about 24 hours. The next day, Dick Young published a column. A despicable column. He didn't attack Seaver's pitching. He didn't attack his contract demands. He attacked Seaver's wife. Young wrote that Nolan Ryan was making more money than Seaver. And that bothered Tom because Nancy Seaver and Ruth Ryan were close friends. Young said Tom had always treated Nolan like a little brother, and now Nolan was making more money. It must have been humiliating, especially for Nancy. Then Young went further. He wrote, "It comes down to this. Tom Seaver is jealous. A man lives up to his contract. He was calling Seaver a liar, a cheat, a jealous, petty man whose wife was driving his decisions." Seaver went into a rage. The issue wasn't the money. It was that Young had dragged his wife into it. Nancy Seaver had done nothing wrong. She didn't deserve to be smeared in the newspaper. But Young didn't care. He was trying to provoke Seaver, and it worked. Seaver immediately called the Mets PR director. He said, "Get me out." He demanded a trade. The peace deal was dead. The relationship was over. And it was all because of Dick Young. Think about the timing. A peace deal had been reached the day before. Young's column came out the next morning. That's not a coincidence. Young knew about the deal. He almost certainly got the information from Grant or Geary, and he published the column specifically to sabotage it, to push Seaver past the point of no return. It worked perfectly. Grant got what he wanted. He could now trade Seaver and blame it on Seaver demanding out. Grant's official statement after the trade was a masterclass in spin. He said, "It is with sincere regret that we have met Tom Seaver's request and traded him to Cincinnati." He made it sound like he had no choice, like Seaver had forced his hand. But everyone knew the truth. Grant had engineered the whole thing. On June 15, 1977, the trade went through. Tom Seaver was sent to the Cincinnati Reds for 4 players: Pat Zachary, Doug Flynn, Dan Norman, Steve Henderson. One journalist had already called it a schoolboy drawing. It was a terrible return for one of the greatest pitchers in baseball. But Grant didn't care. He wanted Seaver gone, and he got his wish. To complete the purge, Dave Kingman was also traded that same night. 2 stars, gone. The front page of the New York Daily News screamed the headline, "Mets deal stars, Seaver to Reds, Kingman to SD." The event became known as the Midnight Massacre, and it was a black day in Mets history. The reaction from other journalists was swift and brutal. They knew what had happened, they knew who was to blame, and they weren't going to stay silent. Maury Allen was a sports writer for the New York Post. He was respected. He had been covering baseball for years. He knew the game, he knew the players, he knew the politics, and he knew what Dick Young had done. Allen broke the era's unwritten rule. He attacked another journalist by name. In that era, journalists didn't do that. They had an informal code. They didn't go after each other publicly. They kept their disputes private. But Allen felt this was too important. The stakes were too high. His story ran with a banner headline that would echo through baseball history. Dick Young ran Tom Seaver out of town. It was an open declaration of war, a direct accusation, a line in the sand. Allen wrote that he had never written about another newspaperman by name before. Never in his entire career, but he felt it was so important for fans to know the truth about Young's fight with Seaver. He felt people needed to understand what had really happened. This wasn't just baseball business. This wasn't just a trade. This was a character assassination that destroyed a franchise, and someone needed to say it out loud. Allen didn't just speculate. He didn't just give his opinion. He reported facts, hard facts. He wrote that Seaver himself had told him he was leaving because he couldn't play in a town where Dick Young was so powerful. Seaver had said this directly to Allen. It wasn't secondhand information. It wasn't a rumor. It was Seaver's own words. Young had made New York toxic for him, made it impossible to stay. The columnist had that much power, that much influence, and he used it to destroy someone's life. Allen also exposed the conflict of interest that everyone had been whispering about. He revealed that Young's son-in-law, Thornton Geary, worked for the Mets, that Grant had hired him, that Young was literally family with the Mets organization, that his objectivity was completely compromised. That's why Young was so sympathetic to Grant. That's why he always took management's side. That's why he attacked Seaver so viciously. He wasn't being a journalist. He was protecting his family's employer. He was doing favors for his relatives. It was corrupt. It was unethical. And Allen put it all out there for the world to see. Young lost his mind. He went on radio and TV to badmouth Allen in the Post. The feud wasn't just covered by the media, it was a war within the media. And it proved one thing. Everyone knew Young had sabotaged Seaver. Everyone knew Grant was behind it, and the truth was finally coming out. But the media war was nothing compared to what the fans did, because the fans delivered the most devastating verdict. The Midnight Massacre is still remembered as the Mets' most unforgivable sin in history. Even decades later, even after championships and Hall of Famers and great moments, this trade stands out. It's the worst thing the Mets ever did to their fans. The ultimate betrayal. Fans didn't just get angry. They didn't just complain on sports radio. They felt betrayed. Deeply, personally betrayed. Like someone had stabbed them in the back. Like their trust had been violated. One fan later shared a memory of his father that captures the feeling perfectly. He said it was the only time in his entire life his dad had cursed the team. His father, who had been a loyal Mets fan through all the losing seasons, through all the disappointments, said something he never said about anything. He said, "They can go to hell, I'm done." He felt so betrayed that he cursed Monsieur Donald Grant. And he kept cursing him. He never let it go. He cursed Grant until the day he died. That's how deep the wound went. That's how much it hurt. Nancy Seaver summed it up perfectly. She understood what her husband had lost, what had been taken from him. She said Tom wanted to live and die a Met. That was his dream. To spend his entire career in New York. To retire with the team he helped turn into champions. His loyalty was absolute. He gave everything to that organization, and his loyalty was thrown in his face. Spat on, destroyed. Tom was hurt badly. Nancy said she didn't think he'd ever admit how much. Men like Tom don't show that kind of pain. But it was there. He wanted to live and die a Met, and they jilted him. They betrayed him. They threw him away like he was nothing. The fans responded the only way they could. They stayed away. Attendance plummeted. Shea Stadium became a dreary, empty tomb. And that's what fans called it. Grant's Tomb. It was the perfect, bitter pun. Grant's Tomb is a famous monument in Manhattan, the burial place of President Ulysses S. Grant. But now, Shea Stadium was also Grant's tomb, a dead stadium, killed by M. Donald Grant. And the numbers back it up. In 1976, before the trade, the Mets drew over 1,468,000 fans to Shea Stadium. In 1977, the year of the trade, attendance dropped to 1,066,000. That's a 27% drop. By 1978, it was down to 1,007,000. By 1979, it collapsed to 788,000, a 46% drop from 1976. Nearly half the fans were gone. They voted with their wallets and their feet. Their message was clear. They didn't hate Tom Seaver. They hated M. Donald Grant. Grant was finally forced out in 1978. But the damage was done. The Mets entered their darkest era. They became a laughingstock, a symbol of futility and mismanagement. All because one man couldn't stand that a player was beloved. So let's go back to the beginning. Did Tom Seaver deserve to be hated? Absolutely, but not by the legends. Not by his peers, not by the fans. He deserved to be hated by a Wall Street executive who saw baseball players as property. He deserved to be hated by a corrupt journalist who used his column to wage personal vendettas. He deserved to be hated by a system that couldn't accept smart, independent athletes who demanded respect. Grant and Young hated Seaver because he represented the future. A future where players had power, where they could negotiate, where they could speak their minds, where they didn't have to bow down to owners and executives. Seaver was everything the old guard feared, and they destroyed him for it. But they didn't just destroy Seaver. They destroyed the Mets. They destroyed a championship team. They turned a packed stadium into a graveyard. And they earned a legacy that will never be forgotten. Grant's Tomb, a fitting monument to hate, ego, and the death of a dynasty. Before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What part of the Tom Seaver story shocked you the most? Was it Grant's jealousy, Dick Young's betrayal, the fact that Nancy Seaver was dragged into it? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now. Because there are a lot more stories like this one. Stories about the legends who changed the game, and the people who tried to stop them. The hate for Tom Seaver was real, but it came from the wrong people. It came from men who couldn't stand change. Men who saw athletes as servants, not partners. Men who believed money and power gave them the right to crush anyone who stood up to them. And in the end, they lost. Seaver went to Cincinnati. He kept winning. He made the Hall of Fame. His legacy is secure. Grant and Young, they're remembered as villains, as symbols of everything that was wrong with baseball. as the men who killed the Mets and built their own tomb in the process.